Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome everyone. Just going to wait a couple of minutes for all the entrants to come into the room. Joined today by Mark Hanley, Marc Graindourze and Simon Edwards, who've all been on these kind of panels before, so well versed with that, with this kind of thing. And we're kind of, the aim of today really is a review of the year. We've had actually 2 InPrint shows and a look back and a look ahead to next year. And we're suggesting with this webinar that we think industrial print is moving on to another level. So we're going to discuss around what that means, why that might be, and some examples of or evidence of that, I guess. And I'm going to start by setting the scene, and then we're going to go into Mark Hanley, who's going to present some numbers. Marc Graindourze from Agfa Graphics. I've long been a supporter of InPrint, and Agfa have experienced, I guess, some strong success since 2014. And so Mark's got some great insight there and experience of how that's happened and some observations too. And then Simon Edwards at Tonejet is and has been involved with InPrint quite a long time too. But during that time, I think Tonejet's evolved as well. And I think some really good example of how the market's developing as Tonejet's technology is developed. So he's going to talk a bit about that and his experience with InPrint. So I'm just going to start now. So I think everybody that's here is here. I'm the one of the co-founders of the InPrint show. InPrint 2017. This was the 3rd edition in Germany. Coming up next year, InPrint show initially will be our 5th edition. We've just had the largest InPrint show, 153 exhibiting companies, and really successful event. And again, we observe some differences with the show this year compared to the show in 2015, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. Next year, we have our first Industrial Inkjet conference in Chicago, which we're looking forward to, excited about. Already got a lot of support building for that event, following on from our US show this year. And of course, InPrint will take place in Europe in Milan in November next year. And again, that's already shaping up really well to be another excellent event taking place in Milan, sort of a little bit more for the Italian market. So our theme today really is moving on to another level. So I'm going to ask the question, is it moving on to another level first and foremost? Why is that? And I guess underneath it, why is it taking so long? Or is it taking so long? Some discussions and examples, and also a look ahead to 2018. Growth predictions have changed over the past 3 years. Each year we ask around 150 people respond what their expectations of growth for the coming year are. And we ask at the same time in January, really just to gauge optimism in the market and so on. And broadly speaking, it's a really optimistic market. So all of these figures are great, but you can see from this graph that from 2015, following the first InPrint show, to 2015 and then 2016, just following the second one, that there was a real spike in the 2016 period, and then perhaps earlier this year a bit of a dip down. So a growth in the 1 to 5% category in growth expectations, and quite a big dip down in the 5 to 10%. So this would suggest there's a sort of rationalization of expectations, and it's not by any means negative, but actually in many respects I think it's a positive thing. And what we've also observed and seen in both in discussions and surveys and so on is that actually I think you can apply this kind of Gartner hype cycle to a lot of new technologies entering new markets, is that you really do get a sort of spike up towards this kind of peak of inflated expectations. And as it is a hype cycle, you do get that hype element. I think in that period we got a real sense of excitement and enthusiasm that industrial print or industrial inkjet or digital industrial print really was going to accelerate and change the markets very quickly. And as those figures suggest, people liked I guess to some extent really fell in love with all of the value that a digital process can give, of which I've listed here are some. And it seems to link with the whole, seem to coincide with this Industry 4.0 message that was coming through. So that's kind of where we see the hype, and that's great, and that's part of the learning and understanding of what the value was. And I think that's entirely a normal thing. But then, of course, after that, you get this sort of slight disenchantment when things perhaps don't happen quite as quickly as you would hope, and don't grow in quite an orderly fashion, because let's be honest, innovation's quite a messy process. It's not predictable, and there's lots of trial and error involved. And I think we'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. So we see a little bit, and this is conversationally as well, where people are a bit sort of frustrated perhaps that the indications are good and the figures are great, but they're not seeing it immediately in the bottom line. And I think, again, that's a sort of a human but normal thing. And then we discovered ourselves, we even published a white paper called The Growing Pains of Industrial Print, because there's a bunch of reasons that we ascertained why perhaps things weren't happening as quickly. And here they are, and I'm not going to talk about each one. And these barriers to growth were not just technical ones, also cultural ones. And that is an ongoing thing, I think. But nonetheless, that kind of momentum is building. It's still in a positive way, but perhaps in a more rationalized way. We also saw a lot of M&A perhaps in the last 2 years. And I think that indicates a market where there's lots of innovation. Quite often the innovation is coming from the smaller companies that are being acquired by the larger businesses with the cash, but that don't have that innovative culture. Again, that indicates a market in a state of flux and development. So yeah, I just think this all makes sense, and it's coming through. And what I'm suggesting, and gentlemen, you may not agree, but I'm starting to sense that it's much more, industrial inkjet's moving much more up that slope of enlightenment now, where there's a much clearer understanding of where the value is going, what applications are working, and which ones are right, and which ones perhaps are not quite as relevant for development. And again, I think it's a normal thing. This is a one step on. This is a Tim Ferriss slide, and I like it because it's kind of, he applies this to entrepreneurs. And I think with a new thing, you go out into the market, you have this uninformed optimism because you just love the idea, and you're out and you go out into the market and you come up against perhaps a little bit of a wall of resistance. And you can't quite work out why people don't love your new idea, because there are all these barriers and resistance, because there are lots of traditional thinking and so on. Then you get the stage 2, which is kind of a more of an informed pessimism, where it's kind of, you hit a kind of bit of a miserable wall and you're wondering why people are not buying into it, or your progress is not as fast as you'd hoped. That again is really normal. And then you go down this kind of to number 3, this kind of crisis of meaning. Some companies I've observed as well at that point perhaps give up on their digital projects because they can't work out how to do it, and it just doesn't look as easy or successful. And then they crash and burn, and some stay on the course, are patient, apply it, and keep persisting, and reach that cycle of the number 5 of informed optimism. So that's kind of, I think, the cycle of broadly where industrial inkjet is going. In amongst all of that, there's all these advances that we've seen that are making inkjet and digital industrial print more accepted by traditional industry, because it's becoming better and better and better. And I think the technical risks are starting to diminish, so the barriers are starting to come down, which is exciting. But that again is a cyclical thing that it's moving on to another level. So I'm going to now hand over to Mark, and I've got your slides. This slide shouldn't be your first slide. The next one, Mark. Just to really see. So on.
Yeah, we've just got 3 slides, so you turn them for me and I'll get through them quickly.
Sure. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you first of all, again, Marcus, for your company providing this forum. There's nothing like it. It's great. I thoroughly approve. Thank you for inviting me in particular. I'm just going to give you all a quick rundown of numbers the way we see them. Remember, we're a vendor consultant, so our core anchor statistically is what vendors obtain in the way of revenue. And I'm looking on this slide at what their revenues are for color printing beyond the office. That's a very broad definition of industrial, and I divide it into three parts there. Document, which is your indigos, your digital presses, your continuous feed inkjets. Then labels and packaging, which mostly is labels. I'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. And then the rest is truly what I call industrial. So if you look at the value to vendors, that's hardware and consumables in 2017 of sales into non-office markets, about 12 billion. If you included all the production monochrome print that's done outside the office, plus the CAD, plus the OEM heads and various miscellaneous bits and pieces, that's actually another $5 billion, so $17 billion, against the overall size of the digital print industry, around about $100 billion these days. Next slide, please, Marcus.
Sorry.
Now, if you take my industrial, remember that was 65% of the slide of the pie on the previous slide. That's about 7.9 billion. This is how that's split, and you'll see in the middle of the bar there are three huge markets. The biggest one by far being display graphics. Other people call it wide format. And then you have above that ceramic tiles, and below that textiles. All three of those markets have developed into true production markets, although that doesn't necessarily translate to being high volume printer by printer, because, for example, the wide format market, highly fragmented. But I would call all of those three well-established, serious industrial markets. And when you take those out, what you have left is about 1.6 billion, which is made up of all these other smaller parts. I must say, I completely agree with your interpretation, Marcus, that people a few years ago, when you first started InPrint, were very euphoric almost in some areas. And I think everywhere I talk to people now, people have come back to the realism. The fact is, it's a difficult market technically. It's a difficult market commercially in terms of channel. This isn't substitution. This is reinvention of print, and it just takes a long time. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's a benefit to all of us, in my opinion, even though some large companies wish it would go faster. So to me, this is a healthy picture, and all of those items in the bar chart you're looking at represent very serious investment by people, often right up at the front end of the market, doing startup things, and that's great news, and particularly strong in Europe, as I always like to say, and it's really true. Next slide. Just quickly, because it does touch on what you increasingly hear talked about at InPrint these days, packaging. If you look at all the revenues that are earned today at a very early stage of the packaging market in digital, it's about just under $1 billion, of which labels is 81% of that today. So the amount of packaging revenue that goes to digital vendors in real markets is very small. I'm not including any coding here. I'm talking about full color printing. So it's a real beginner's market, and but some very bold moves have been made. The potential is obviously huge. But I thought it was worth mentioning here that packaging is at an early stage. I think that's good news, and people are really pushing themselves into the market and testing their technologies. Quite big names have gone out with brave initiatives, which I fully applaud, into areas like flexible packaging and, of course, corrugated, biggest item of all these days. So again, this is good news, but I'm sure, as you say, Marcus, it's going to take its time. So I think I feel optimistic, and to me, reinvention of the market is kind of the title of what I talked about at InPrint. What I mean by that is people are realizing it's all new, commercially and technically. Good news.
Great.
Mark,
Yes.
Does the labels section include shrink film labels as well in that 81%?
There is some in there. It's not huge, but yes, narrow format digital presses are sometimes used for shrink film, yes. It's a small part of the overall shrink market, but there's definitely a trend. In fact, there's a trend in flexible packaging in general to be able to have shorter runs, even in analog, using narrower format machines. So there's some of that in there, yes.
Okay.
Mark, have you got any questions for Mark?
No, I love the wording of reinvention of print. I think it's exactly what we do. But I want to make one comment on that. It depends also who is doing this. If it's a market leader of the traditional production, even when not including printing, but could be applying a label, now develops a system to print, for instance, direct on a container. That's taking a step which I do like personally, because that gives me a better chance to go faster. It will take time, but because people that know the market and adapt the technology are going into the packaging market.
Yeah, and packaging because it's just so appealing, Mark, just from a size thing and from a closeness to consumer, a dynamic market, etc. Is that why packaging is so appealing?
Well, anybody who's been to a presentation of mine will know I'm repeating myself, but the basic value proposition is very clear, that industry in all its huge sectors, which is driving the consumer, which is driven by the consumer economy, that industry has, in its analog format, gone to higher and higher volumes, lower and lower costs, which has meant it's sort of going in the opposite direction of demand, because demand is becoming more fragmented. So there's a lot of inefficiency in analog printing, and digital printing can communicate much more efficiently, and that sells more product. It's really very simple. I think everybody's aware of that, and all the packaging sectors.
Yes, I totally agree with that. I mean, it's interesting that the packaging sector is one of the greatest pain points in the industry. A lot of the other areas of digital printing potentially are upside markets where they're new market potential, whereas we're seeing, particularly in the packaging sector, short run due to fragmentation becoming quite an issue, where in fact some cases people are seeing run lengths reduced by a factor of 10 over the last 5 years. So obviously one of the things about where you've got significant pain point and absolute need, potentially places where you've got below cost printing, in fact, in some cases to retain customers. That's what makes packaging, particularly digital printing for those packaging sectors, very attractive, because there's a desperate need to satisfy those problems.
Yeah, I find again and again, we have to do a lot of user research these days, and again, when you go out to the front end of the market, that's where people really want the benefits of digital. And it's often at the back end of the market, the larger vendors who, need to stay close to that and respond to that.
So on the packaging side, where we've seen, and we'll talk a bit more about it before I introduce Mark, we've seen lots of examples of, Marmite and some of the consumer brands with personalized products that you can download and you can buy, and you've got your name on it or even your picture on it, and it's all very, well, it's interesting, I suppose. In your opinion, is that a little misleading, really? Is that dumbing down the value of digital print for packaging printing? Is it actually more structurally valuable than that?
No, one thing, I know an example of this that we probably all know in the UK, where the KitKat project produced this ultra personalization. Yeah, it's certainly not. It's a tiny part of the market, but I love it because the guys doing that is saying, I'm not interested in analog print anymore. I want to really push digital where it can go. It doesn't matter if it's small right now, but I'm going to hold a flag up and people are going to follow me. So that's the function of that, and I love that. Yeah,
so what you're saying is it's showcasing. It's showcasing the potential.
And actually, it's more than that. They got beyond the print buyer. That's the bit I love. They went to the people who have the marketing budgets. And I'm not saying that's the model for the whole industry, of course not. But it was a smart move, and it freed up a lot of money to go and do something very creative.
Yeah, and that's where they bypass the traditional route of production or operation side and actually reach the strategic marketing people.
Yeah, that's a whole other dialogue, because those print buyers, are just interested in cost.
Yeah.
And that's the death of digital.
Yeah, and bypassing that's got to be a secret, isn't it? And that's as much of a commercial challenge as a technical one, isn't it, really? Yeah.
I think so.
Marc Graindourze, obviously, you're with Agfa Graphics. I believe Agfa make a lot of ink, and I hear, and obviously in lots of markets. So it's going to be interesting now to talk to you about your perception, perhaps look not just on this year, but looking back sort of to 2014, because you've seen markets developed. Indeed, Agfa has developed a really sizable industrial print business over the last few years as well. So I'm going to find your slides and ask you to introduce Agfa.
Okay, thanks, Marcus, and thanks for the possibility to talk today to interested people. And I must say that Mark Hanley was very interesting to listen to look into the market. It's always helpful that we see where we are inside of those applications. Now, I want to first have a first slide, very short, on Agfa at InPrint. We see that this is a very important technology platform where we can show ourselves to the full line of people that are involved in projects in industrial printing, being the brand owner, being a converter, being a producer of a printer system. So as an ink supplier, we have the opportunity to talk all those relevant people that are part of a solution, because everything in this market is solution-driven approach. That has from the beginning been our view on this. We as an ink supplier only hold a piece of the cake, and this year we wanted to show that to the world and has introduced our Agfa Partner Awards, and we're very enthusiastic about the receival of this in some papers, journals, but also that people, our partners, put the little statue on their booth, showing that they were happy to be one of our partners. In the end, it's all about helping our customers, our mutual customers, to have a good solution. And it's also what InPrint is about. It brings those people together. So let's move to the next slide. I've tried to do my best in 2 slides to have some view on the growth, and 2017 is a special year in that the growth accelerates. Not only in the volume of ink, which of course is important, but more or less in how inkjet is used. We're always concerned about how people use inkjet printing. Do it use for the combination? Do it use for the correct application, etc.? And when you look back the last 4 years, it's definitely continuous growth. But of course, inkjet is much more difficult than some people think. It's not easy to make a full working solution in an industrial environment. So there was a long learning curve. But it's very clear now that in some parts of the application, it's not more a learning, it's reality. We see that our customers who build the systems get repeating orders of the same, and that some of their systems are used all the time. That's confidence. So it's shown that inkjet printing can work as a solution. And what is good, because we have been pushing the technology, but only push is never working. So we see now clearly a pull. And last week we are on a conference, Simon and Marcus and myself, and I like the expression that somebody used: print or produce combining printing to demand. We're always having the discussion on what is a short run length and a medium and what can you do with inkjet, but actually the reason why I see it growing is exactly that expression. Inkjet is able to deliver at the right cost, at a good speed, to the demand that is needed in some of the volume of the printed packaging or decoration. Not everything for sure. We're still in the early phases of percentage that is inkjet. But with that percentage, which has a high value, we can print to a demand which is there from the brand owners or the consumers. And for me personally, it's not personalization. I like the KitKat idea, but I don't think we will ever get rich in this industry by only those hypes, I would say. We will get rich by the really mass customization, by the print-on-demand seasoning, and using inkjet, what it can do. We learned on that conference that some people have their full line of one type of products, baby care products in that case, fully all labels printed by inkjet or digital. So it means that it's possible. It's proven today that some people do not go back analog. And all the elements already, you can always wait for a better system. And some people will wait for a next generation. But basically, there are systems working today, proven to work all the time. That's why I say we are growing into adoption. Label, of course, is adopted. But the others are growing into that phase, coming out of the emerging states. Every pace is different, of course, but we're never mature yet at any point of any application. But seriously, adoption is happening. That's why you also see the repeating orders. If we then go to the last slide, Where is it happening? Basically, when we started, we focused strongly on packaging and decoration. And actually, we still do. But we included some extras, like marking and coding is a market which is strongly overlooked. As an ink supplier, it's a very important one. These are good markets with high ink volumes, and there is some kind of let's say mixing of all the applications, like direct to container, marking and coding, packaging. The people that used to build a easy one color marking and coding system, one color head white, are now moving into very interesting print systems to print direct on a box, for instance, where you can promote on one side a shop, on the other side the product, etc. You have all these options because you print at the last possible moment. I use this example because we have a lot of discussion this year. It's a corrugated year. Everybody is talking about it. But you will see three types of printing systems. One to print on the paper, the first stage, so we have still a long time before it's going to be filled as a box. Print on a corrugated sheet, which of course is interesting because it's easy to print on the full sheet. But printing on the box, when it's already filled, you know exactly the amount, the languages, the promotion. Of course, it's more difficult to print on a large box. But all three exist, and to my opinion, will keep coexisting forever. And that's what's interesting. Another highlight I want to show or tell to you is packaging the full packaging. Sorry, printing digitally the full packaging. Think about a box with pharmaceuticals, a blister. You print with a low migration ink on the aluminium blister foil. You print insertion paper with inkjet 200 meters a minute today with black color, and you print a folding carton box with inkjet full color. All three parts of the final packaging are printed digitally. So that also means that you can do that all at the last possible moment. And then in pharmaceutical, we have a driving force by the track and trace thing. So a lot of things happening in packaging. When we take the direct to shape on cans, etc., tubes, we see that there are multiple offerings, multiple technologies, and I think Simon is well placed to also comment strongly on that. But beyond the direct container printing, there is a lot of direct to shape and product printing happening, which is non-packaging, and which could involve robotized printing, automotive, many different solutions happening. Unfortunately, as Marcus mentioned, a lot of NDAs, so very difficult to go into details, but it's happening today, the product printing, more general than a direct container. Also, a hype word of the year, or Label Expo, those that visited in Brussels, is embellishment, building tactile effects. And what is very interesting is that you see this being done by inkjet all the time. Whatever is done before, it can be toner printed, can be offset flexo, whatever. On top, you're going to do tactile effect with a few hats inkjet and build different heights and effects. And that's very nice. That's doing something that inkjet is capable. A segment that is a bit lost sometimes is the decoration sector. Again, it's very segmented. And there are two options to go for this, which is happening already some time. The last one is offer last stage customization, which was too expensive before with analog techniques. Now you can do it at a reasonable price because people are willing to pay a lot of money for a one-off. So there is no cost barrier at all for inkjet. But of course, that's not a lot of ink volume, could be a lot of print systems, but fit into the existing manufacturing flow. That is really what is Agfa's interest, to be delivering inks that go into real production. And then, of course, economics first fit. That means the price of the ink, the total price, so that you cannot generate extra cost just because you do inkjet. So that's not demanding there, but look to ceramics, what happened. One of the reasons that it happened was the economics. And there are other fields in decoration with water-based ink especially that will happen too. And last but not least, since I'm coming from an ink supplier, I'm very happy to see that people start to understand that the question about what ink and which ink supplier is an early question. In 2014, some people built a full system and then said, oh, now I need an ink. That's gone. It's good that we educated the world that ink is a key element of the solution. Makes my life a bit easier, I would say.
Interesting. You said you finished on that. That ink in our surveys comes out as the biggest technical challenge. In that from what you're suggesting, communication between OEMs and ink providers and developers and integrators has got better, has it, in the past couple of years?
Yes, and including the customer. There are so many projects going on where you have the customer, the print system builder, the ink supplier together and working on a solution. Because if you can make that ink and the printer work very well together in relevance to the specific specifications of that specific print job, that's what we need, and that's happening today, every day.
Mark, an interesting question for you. I mean, a lot of the packaging applications have a coating applied to them after the inking system, yet with, for example, UV inkjet technologies, there seems to be a great deal of an attempt to avoid putting a coating on and rely on the ink, which results in a challenge of attempting to get the same regulatory requirements and the same result as a coating, but using the ink. Do you see equal effort or some effort also going into looking at coatings to try to resolve that issue?
That's a very good question. It's actually spot on. So originally the target was always only UV inkjet, nothing else. That is not a solution for every packaging case. Then we have introduced the pre-treatment, the flames, the plasma, corona, etc. Often is a solution, which is important and which can be up to speed and which is not really consumable. So that's a good solution. Next is primer. There are still a lot of applications where a primer is used and which typically today is an analog kind of primer, which then often does not make necessary to have a pre-treatment. So you don't have a full digital solution, you could argue, but you have the combination of best of both. You have a cheap overall primer that you can never beat in economics by inkjet, but it's overall. So when you print a lot on mostly of the part of the packaging, it's a very good solution. Of course, we are working like many others, I think, on jettable primers. So there will be certainly also market to do everything again by inkjet, fully digital, by having a jettable primer. So again, it's not just one solution, it will a coexistence of all the solutions. And the idea of that is that if you can do that by varying the pre and post process and always use the same ink for some segments of the packaging, that's probably the most economic solution. Also for somebody who prints on many different types of substrates.
And thanks, that's a good question, etc. Customers, from what you're suggesting, are they becoming more tolerant, more patient, more able to be, because I think that one of the misconceptions was that anything digital is a replacement, anything that digital is easier. Has that started to change or has changed? Or do you still find yourself having to do a lot of education with the customer to inform them?
That's improved a lot. Almost everybody I talk to today has a basic knowledge about inkjet. So my first 2 hours at a new customer is not education anymore about what is inkjet. No. But education on ink is still necessary. There are sometimes unrealistic expectations. There are still unrealistic expectations of the timeline of a project. It's unfortunately always takes more time than the first expectation. So yeah, there is still something to do.
Talking to users in research we do, we find naturally, and it's not a bad thing, that when customers have the first early versions of an inkjet system, they find all kinds of things that nobody had thought about, different substrate, different conditions they're working under. And so there's this tremendous laboratory going on out there, and it's very good. What's important, however, is that people, and I'm sure Agfa, I know, do this very well, but not all vendors do it equally well, is to listen to that experience and learn from it. And there's a great deal of it out there. And I sometimes think that it gets lost a bit in larger dialogues. I don't know, but I know Agfa do that very well, as an ink manufacturer would, but there's a lot of experience being gathered.
You're completely right. There is a lot of experiments, and some is lost, or some is protected by the one who combines it. That's still happening. People have found which primer for which substrate is the best one and are not willing to share that. That still happens.
Yes.
You make me also think of another evolution. It used to be in 2014 that everybody wanted to do everything by himself, the ink supply, the printed electronics, everything. Now you see more new print systems coming that they use an existing supply system that you can buy on the market. So do not invent again the hot water. And that's saving a lot of project time and also mistakes, because a simple thing like an ink supply system is actually not simple. And it can hurt the project timeline a lot by leaking tubes or whatever. It's happened too much. So there's a lot of learning curve in that too. And also there, everyone who has a part of the solution in his hand has an obligation, to my opinion, to tell the customer, the end customer, to avoid such traps. And I think that's happening today with many, not only Agfa, but there are more serious suppliers in this world, and that's good. Huh?
Just to jump in quickly there, I think that's a really important point, that the more open development occurs, the faster this market will develop. In the US, I can't really generalize, but I have the sense that here in the US, people keep things much more to themselves and in sort of closed loop projects. In Europe, for whatever reason, there's more open offerings from integrators and innovators in the market. And that sharing at this stage of the market is totally critical. That's why that Italian textiles market is successful, because it was a semi-open cooperation between machine suppliers, ink suppliers, technology suppliers. If you don't do that, 9 out of 10 projects don't go anywhere, right, Mark?
Yeah, and I think we should also mention the inkjet consultants, but I mean technical consultants, people that have inkjet know-how and go help companies that are taking up inkjet. That happens a lot in the industry, and we have a network of people doing that, and we promote them to our new potential customers as integrators to use their knowledge to go faster, and that's also very helpful in Europe.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, so if you're applying, just to finish off on that point, that hype cycle, would you say that's more relevant for Europe, Mark, than it is perhaps for the USA? Is there a different? Is the USA at a different stage, or is it not as easy, simple as that?
I was at InPrint. Oh, sorry.
Which?
Oh, sorry.
I don't.
Yes, go ahead.
Mark.
I have a short comment. So we were at InPrint USA. I was happy to do that. It learned me a lot about what's happening in USA. I think there are a lot of startups as integrators, but not all of them have yet the experience of the European one, being a bit younger. But they're learning much faster, I guess. And so I was happy to see that there is a growing number of those kind of companies that will go faster in the beginning, at least. And that gives me a positive feeling.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thanks, guys.
That's true, but I think, that's why you don't want to be the United States of Europe, because you have such a range of diversity and you do things in so many different countries differently that I think it's very beneficial in a market like this, as opposed to the US, where it's more of a uniform development and arguably, in some ways, less creativity.
Thank you. So I'm now finishing on that point. I'm going to introduce Simon Edwards, who's already been active in this session. He's going to present, obviously, Tonejet's experience of developing the technology, and also through InPrint. So, are you ready, Simon?
I am, Marcus. Can you see my slide set?
I can. Yes.
Very good. Excellent.
Excellent.
Well, just firstly, to echo Mark Hanley's comments, that thanks for the opportunity to be involved in this. We've been involved in InPrint for quite a while now, and found it to be, you know, an enormously beneficial, not just event, but entity in terms of the pre, post event and all the other activities that Marcus and his team put together. What I wanted to do was just touch on, I guess, a few reflections around direct-to-shape, which is an area which we've started to focus quite heavily on, and talk a little bit about InPrint in terms of the benefits we've seen there and some of the things that make a successful InPrint event. And to sort of follow through on that is to use our last InPrint as a little bit of a case study. Mark has said to me, oh, you know, you guys obviously had quite a success at the last InPrint, and you're somewhat of a model organisation that's gone from trying to do a lot of things simultaneously to coming down to much, much more of a focus. And we've actually leveraged InPrint as an event to get that focus as we've been going forward. Anyone that's been to all the previous InPrints will notice that Tonejet has kind of gone from a stage of talking about a lot of different things that we could do to narrowing it down to a few things that we do. And that's the big difference. If we have a look, for example, at the direct-to-shape market, you know, over the past few years, there's been a huge amount of discussion about direct-to-shape printing. The label printing market, the carton board markets, a number of those areas, I guess some of the web film-based industries around digital print have started to really mature. The direct-to-print, however, or direct-to-shape is something that's really started to come together in the last probably 3 to 4 years. We see that as being two separate markets, really. There's the mass market applications. In other words, the things that will get into the hands of the average consumer for average reasons. And those are sort of things where we see small job runs becoming a bit of an issue, which may not be through marketing campaign activity, but only through the segmentation of the market, the proliferation of variety of images that people might want to use, or proliferation of various language content in an attempt to recover real estate on the packaging. So rather than spending or having 50% of the packaging dedicated to different language content about what's in the product, looking at how you can reduce the language content through digital printing and open up that space to be more about the product and about the marketing of the brands. The other second area, of course, is specialty type applications, and they're the kind of things where you see promotional activities, event-based activities, the sort of social media marketing events, or the personalization things, which in themselves don't necessarily add a huge amount of revenue, but certainly bolster the brands. We've seen a lot of activity in the past in the beverage market around that, with the obvious examples in the big beverage companies, particularly the soft drink industry to date. And they've been using that type of capability to really make sure that they either don't lose market share or grow it a little bit through their brand presence and social media activities. There's been a number of different approaches across these various applications. If you take things like aerosol cans, plastic tubes, glass tubes and cylinders, glass products, beverage cans, there's a range of equipment makers out there who are exploring printing machines to address those markets. Now, if we go back 2 or 3 years at the InPrints and other events, we see a lot of machines talking about being able to do many of these things within one machine. You know, so we've seen people talk about machines which can do aerosol, a beverage can, a plastic tube, you know, and glass products all at the same time. Now, while technically that might be the case, practically from a commercial point of view, or from I guess a business point of view, they may not actually have the right cost base. So what we've seen in the last 12 to 18 months, I would say, particularly this last year, is a real settling of those technologies into their right place. So we see a lot of the machines where they might just be used primarily now for printing plastic tubes. So we've got machines in the market who are dedicated to digital printing of plastic tubes. We've now got machines which are more dedicated to looking at printing of aerosols. We've seen machines which are printed or dedicated to printing glass or plastic containers of different shapes. So for me, the last 12 months or so has been a starting of the process of settling into the right place for these technologies, for the right markets, for the right reasons. And I think that means the market is, as you say, Marcus, in your graphs, starting to take it out of that bottom area and into the settling area of finding their right place. And that's really important. The challenge, of course, is that the only way you can do that is to actually start using the machines for real things. as opposed to sort of hypothesizing about what they might be used for. And that really means getting it into the hands of brand owners. And the other thing we see quite a bit is machine makers becoming more creative of how to get their products into the hands of end users. Creative might be the way the machines are designed. Creative might mean, say for example in our case, starting to build a cohort of third-party providers for infrastructure, so that you start as an equipment maker to look at who else needs to supply equipment to make this process work in its entirety rather than just your small area or your area of digital printing. And that's quite important. Also creative, I guess, in the ways in which you get your first machines to market and where they might be located. For me, I think what I can see happening in 2018 is true clarity around these solutions and a real focus on their market viability. So I'm hoping, and I feel quite strongly about this, we will see a number of these machines that we've been seeing at InPrint actually in the hands of users, producing products that's getting into the hands of consumers for everyday products, and really testing their true, not just, I guess, the market viability from a consumer's perspective, but also a market viability from the user's perspective, whether it's financially viable. And I think that's where we're going to see things over the next 12 to 18 months, which will be great because it's the time for these platforms to really prove themselves. And I think that's when things get really exciting, because you then start to see from that, they can then start to branch out again into the various applications where they could become more and more useful once they've found their place and proven themselves in some very particular areas. Just a few words on the InPrint, the couple of InPrints that we've been attending. The Orlando and Munich events were fantastic. I think generally we saw quite a strong quality of attendees. Often it's not about the number of people that turn up for something, it's the rightness of them. Are they the right people to see the right things to progress the industry? And one of the things we see about InPrint is we see a lot of the right people coming through who are going to be able to take up these technologies and take these platforms and actually use them. We see a combination of new players. So we've seen a number of investors, for example, who have some linkage with the industry. They have access to money. They'd like to start a new venture. We see some people that are coming from somewhat parallel aligned industries. A good example is we're seeing label makers who are talking to us about digitally printing cans. They might be making labels for beverage, but may not be for cans, but can see adding to their business a whole new revenue stream by direct printing to beverage cans. So that's quite interesting, seeing these companies which are looking to add on to their business new technologies and capabilities to grow their business. And of course, we're also seeing coming to these forums a lot of the very big players, a lot of the very big converters who have dedicated teams internally focused on looking at digital printing and how that could be used in the medium to long term in their business. Obviously, a great deal of interest is probably self-fulfilling in direct to shape, people coming to talk to us, but also a really healthy number of people looking for flat sheet printing, be it metal sheet or any other flat sheet type applications. One of the things that I find quite important in these things is that it's not just about what you do as a team, Marcus, but it's also about what the exhibitors do. We, as I say, you set the foundation, we bring the people to it, we build the house. So we spent quite a bit of time going out with Twitter and LinkedIn campaigns, email campaigns to really focus on the people we'd like to have come to the events, and developing one-to-one contacts with potentials. So as a result, you know, particularly the last InPrint, we were very, very busy to say the least. We had a very good turnout. We got very good response from our pre-campaigns, which started about 4 weeks beforehand. And I'd encourage that anybody who's on the conference call that is or has been an exhibitor in print, you know, for future InPrints, you can really move up the notch on using social media and communication techniques to really bring in people to the event. That makes an enormous difference. The things that I can see work really well and why we find InPrint to be one of the best platforms for us is that there's a diversity of applications. You don't go to there and think, you know, 80% of the things here are kind of similar. There's lots of different things going on, and that gives a lot of ideas to the attendees. It's got an innovation a lot of innovation in there. And I think that the more innovation, the technology that is at these events, the better. And there's this real spirit of attempting something new. I think that's what I really like. You see a lot of the people and the exhibitors who are looking and talking about the things that they could do which could be different. And obviously showing what you've got is quite important. We managed to bring one of our big machines to the show, which was the first time we've ever really bought a large machine. We've had various things in the past, but actually having our main new printing machine on our stand was really good, and having the space to do that was excellent. We found, of course, at InPrint, the access to the venue, the location was brilliant. We launched our new machine at the show. The location in Germany is really good. That's indicative of the fact that the people we really want to have to come along did turn up. So the right attendees, of course, the right location's a key part of that. The timing was very good for us again. We have just in the last probably 6 to 18 months really started to finish this product, and in fact the last 6 months started to finish it to a level we could bring it to the show, and has started producing production versions of our machines. As I said before, one of the key learnings is that exhibitors, the organisers lay the foundations, but we have to build on top of that. And the other thing I think which worked really well for us and is often difficult to do on a stand is having a space to meet with people. We had an area behind our main stand, which was a meeting room, and we were kind of wondering whether a space as large as we made it was actually going to be useful. It was almost about 80% used while we were there. People were coming in, they wanted to have a chat, we could have a space to talk quietly, often very busy on the stand, but having that space made a really significant difference. I think, open networking is great. Being able to get around and see innovative things is really good, but also having that space to have, good quality conversations made quite a big difference for us. So that's just, some of the reflections on the InPrint at Munich and what really worked for us. One thing I do want to touch on is a really classic case study, I think, and we have talked a lot about this at various presentations recently, and there was a recent event where AB InBev themselves gave a presentation around this activity that we were involved in, which was the Tomorrowland Wave a Flag campaign. And so we were able to use our machine to print cans for AB InBev, in fact for Budweiser, and we printed around about 10,000 cans, with the shortest run being only 15 cans, the largest being 1,400 cans. It's not something you could do in the time frame that we did with any other technology for a couple of reasons. One is because it is short and it has to be done quickly. We only had a matter of weeks to complete these and get them across to AB InBev for filling, and they have to be able to go down a traditional filling line, and they have to go through all the regulation requirements. So it has to have a coating on the outside that is beverage grade coating, a coating which is identical to the coatings used in most of the factories in Europe for cans already, for the non-digital products. And also it needed to get through their filling lines, be capped and filled and passed all their stringent requirements on taste testing. So there's a lot of complications there, and the time frames are very short. And so using a new technology to do that, the turnaround time was quite key. So again, digital printing is good to get the time frame short, but then if you need to iterate anything or you need to top things up, you also need that digital printing capability to do that. And we leveraged that to quite a high extent. So in fact, this was done in a very short space of time, in a matter of less than a month turnaround time from the printing process to actually getting it ready to go. So it's a really good case study of the sorts of things that we're seeing with our new technology and product, and the things that Direct to Shape needs to be able to address is to be able to achieve that similar external requirement of the product that's similar to the existing products that are produced in the conventional way. Just one quick last slide. This is the machine that we've been talking about. I think most people have seen this at the show, and if not, they can download these things at websites. So I'm not going to go into any great extent on that. But just in general, the market is really starting to grow. It's starting to get some real key focus, and InPrint is most certainly a fantastic forum to help that focus and to provide people with the insight of where the industry is going.
Cheers. Thanks, Simon. So, and that really, the launch of Cyclone was a culmination of a period of where, like you said, you used the show to really, and other things, to really kind of get that clarity, to crystallize quite what market you were going for with your technology. Is that, have I got that right?
That's right. So, so the history of our business is that we have a printing head technology at the heart of it, which is very different to any other printing heads, that could be used for, can actually print onto a massive range of substrates. But once again, it's one of those things, it's very easy to say that, but actually what really matters is getting things to be totally functional on at least one application that people desperately need. So, you know, we've gone through that evolution over the last 4 or 5 years, quite a high focus on this product for printing direct on the metal cylinders to really satisfy desperate need, but in a very unique way. And yes, you're right, Marcus, you know, we've obviously leveraged the event as part of that. So each time we've attended to keep that, to actually get further and further focused down towards the application and the product.
So as you told me, Simon, when we were at InPrint, over 5,000 craft breweries just in the US producing over 4 billion cans, none of which can be printed by the standard printing techniques used for higher volumes.
That's right, exactly. So it's a classic desperate need problem. There's 5,500 craft breweries in North America. There's 6,500 craft breweries if you look at the entire of Europe. So you've got between Europe and North America, well over 10,000 craft breweries, each of which want to be able to have canned products at some stage, which are of the order of 20 to 50,000 can job runs, which nobody wants to deliver through conventional processes. So at the moment, they're using paper labels, they're using shrink film, very high cost, have various issues with them. Those things work, but they're a bit of a stopgap. What they need is a technology which actually is significantly cheaper, easier to implement. So yes, it's a great example of the alignment between a desperate need and a technology which is very well tuned to that application in all respects.
Yeah, and like what you might think is a niche is a growing niche, and you know, one that's receptive to the innovation. So it's kind of, but to get to that point took time, right? I mean, he could have gone in various ways. So that's just part of that kind of realizing where the value is, and then
it's a particularly big niche.
Yeah, it's a good niche, isn't it? Yeah, it's a nice one. Yeah, I think it's a good one.
It's quite sizable and surprisingly growing at a very steady rate. We thought when we saw the market 4 or 5 years ago that it was unrealistically high, but in fact its growth rate has constantly gone up, and there's no signs of it slowing at the moment.
No, that's great news, and that's really, I guess, with the formation of new markets that don't have the legacy of how, you know, a culture of doing things in a certain way can just bypass that whole process. So yeah, best of luck with them. With Cyclone, has anybody else got any comments? But from what I'm gathering, from what everybody's sort of saying, is that actually industrial print for inkjet and for more digital industrial print is absolutely moving on to another level.
I would say just one thing occurs to me. Both Marc Graindourze and Simon Edwards mentioned that there are things that come up that suddenly get big. I mean, craft breweries could well be that. There are some decorative markets you were referring to, Marc Graindourze, that is true. Some of them could get big quickly, maybe even like ceramic tiles. So at the moment, you've got a lot of small things moving fairly slowly, and that's necessary. But you're going to find things are going to jump out and get big, and that's the fun of the game. If you got your finger on that button, you're going to do well.
Like you say, it's about stars aligning, isn't it? It's about timing. It's lots of factors. I also get the impression, if you look at the retail market this year, that's changed structurally, I think. Noticeably, things changing really quickly in terms of how consumers are behaving. I'm sure that is having an impact on supply chains having to adapt more quickly than they perhaps like to.
Here in the US, they talk about retail now. In future, go 10, 20 years forward, they won't be selling anything at retail, but it'll all be about the image, the experience, the feeling. So all that sounds like it's good for printing.
Yeah.
And then when you want the product, you just get it from the internet.
Exactly. Yeah, you have the experience, and then you shop at leisure. Yeah, absolutely. Interesting, gentlemen. I think that rounds up the hour, so that's perfectly timed. Thank you very much, all of you. You've been great.
Thank you.
Really, really interesting. Really
Pleasure.
positive end to the year. I do sense things have moved on to another level. I think we roundly agree, and I think that we look forward to 2018 having even more clarity. So thanks very much, and Merry Christmas, everybody that's tuned in. All right.
Happy.
Okay.
Yes.
Cheers.
Thank
Thanks.
you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.